Okay, guys, come on, come on. Идите сюда, вот возле нас, давайте.
I've been teaching students for 30 years, believe me. I've had students that are more stubborn than you are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, you come up. This seat is empty. Come up here. Come up here. And while they're moving up here and you're coming up here, we're all going to be friends. We're all going to be close here. There's no need to spread out. You have these yellow cards in front of you. Sean, I think there's some in the back that don't. Would you fold this card in half and write your name on the card? I don't know everyone yet, but you will be participating in this, and so it helps me to know your name. My name is Glenn Anderson. I am a Peace Corps volunteer. I'm originally from Western New York, but I've spent most of my life in Orlando, Florida. I've been a teacher for 30 years in the United States. Currently, I live in Lviv for the last 2.5 years, teaching at Lviv Polytechnic. I know some of you from the camps that we have. Welcome. Please come. Yes. I think most of you know Sean Hicks, but if you don't, Sean?
Most popular person.
I see a lot of familiar faces in this room, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean Hicks. I'm also a Peace Corps volunteer. I work at Chernobyl National Economic University in the Department of Foreign Languages, where I teach English classes, I do English clubs, and I do some teacher trainings. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for being in attendance, and so we look forward to doing the session with you.
So our session today is a little bit abbreviated. It was a 6-hour session. We've condensed it to 3 hours. But we will have the information available for you, all the resources that we have, all of the lesson plans and the links. And Sean will be able to share that with you. So what are we talking about this morning? Everyone in this room is a university professor, correct? Yes. Some of you are university professors in Ukraine. Some of you are university professors in Moldova.
Yes.
Where are our Moldovan friends? Yes. Welcome. Yes. I look forward to visiting your country someday. It's so close. Why not? Right? Do we have anyone here from Germany? The bad news is that there is a crisis in the university system of the world, not just Ukraine. And unfortunately, the people who don't realize that there is a crisis are university rectors and university teachers. We are on our way out. We are becoming obsolete. And it is almost certain that your children and your grandchildren either will not be going to a university or will not be going to a university that bears any resemblance to the university that we went to. The problem is, and this is a strange problem, we are a victim of our own success. Everyone in this room succeeded in the university system as it exists. It worked fine for us. What's the problem? Just work harder, study harder. What's the problem with students who don't succeed? They are lazy. They don't work hard enough. They don't apply themselves the way that we did. If they were just like us, they would be successful in the system that exists. But they're not lazy, and they're not stupid. They look at the universities that exist today and they ask themselves, what is this doing for me in the future? And too often the answer is nothing. What I study in university has no bearing on what I will do in my life. Very often I can walk into a classroom in a university and you could not tell if that classroom was a classroom from 2019 or 1919 or 1819. It hadn't changed. But look at how the world around us has changed. I am one of the older folks here. I just turned 59 years old. And I know, it's just, how can you believe this, right? And when I think about the world as it existed when I was the age of my students, when I was 19, there is almost, it's like I'm on another planet today. The things that we had, the technology we had, the world that we lived in, it was in the process of changing, but it hadn't changed yet. In a lot of ways, we still lived in the tail end of that industrial world. I grew up in Western New York. The largest city near me was called Rochester, New York. And our biggest factory, we had two big factories there. One was a Xerox company. Is there anyone here old enough to know what a Xerox is? What is a Xerox? You make a photocopy, right? What wonderful technology that was. You could take a paper and just make a photocopy, right? The Xerox company is no more in Rochester. People don't need big photocopy machines. I mean, yes, we still have them. The other company was Kodak Camera and Film. Oh, this company was going to be around forever. It was huge. It drove the entire economy of Western New York. Whatever business you worked in, you waited for when the Kodak workers got their bonus because they would then spend. And it drove because it was so prosperous. And then overnight, Kodak film disappeared because the world instantly embraced digital. And then, okay, so Kodak is rushing, we'll keep up. We will make digital cameras. Well, guess what? I went 2 weeks ago to buy a camera because this is my third camera in Ukraine. I keep breaking them at my camps all the time. And I went into Comfy to buy a camera, and I'm looking at the smile. There we go. I'm looking at the cameras I want. Here's a small, inexpensive one. And I'll say, I'll take this one. And the clerk, he's very friendly. He goes, it's a good camera, but it's the only one we have, and it's on display. Everybody's touched it. So I pointed to another one. Okay, this is a little more expensive. I'll take this one. We don't have any. It's just the display. I went to the store next door. They had cameras. Okay, I'll take this one. It's the only one we have. It's on display. I said, why don't you have cameras, only display? He said, nobody buys cameras. Everyone has a camera in their cell phone. So not only is the film on the way out or gone, cameras are gone too. If you'd have told me this when I was 19, that there would be no Kodak company for me to get a job at, come on. Of course there will. It's a huge company. When I was young, our parents were worried about us watching too much television. People wrote articles about how television is damaging us, how we spend too much time with television. I read an article about a census taker who said we should count the television as a member of the family because people in the family spend more time with the television than they do with each other. Everybody was worried about television. I asked my students today, do you have a television? Almost none of them do. Will you own a television when you have your own home? Of course not. Television is for old people as far as they're concerned. If you had told me when I was 19 that televisions would go the way of the Victrola, you know, the record player you wind up with the big horn, no, television is everywhere, and yet it's disappearing. I don't really need to convince you that the world is changing. But why do we think, as the world changes around us, that education and universities will stay the way that they've always been? Especially when the revolution that we are in, it's not a computer revolution. It's not a communication revolution. It is an information revolution. This is our business, information. And for so long, universities were all about inculcating, teaching, educating people with the received body of information that made somebody an educated person. You go back to the 19th century. An educated person could speak Latin, could speak Greek, knew the classics of literature and history. That education went by the wayside. But still, the basic concept of education stayed the same. We take our students, we open their little heads, we pour all the information in that they should know, close their little heads, and send them on the way to be successful people, right? How much information can we put into their little heads, excuse me, that will, pardon me, be able to compete with this? All the information of the world is right here. And not just the information. Do you want someone to teach you this information? You can go online and get the world's experts that give you little tutorials on physics, on chemistry, on language. There is a great site that I discovered a while back ago. It's called Quora. It's a question and answer site. You can type any question you want and someone will answer. But not just someone. If you have a question about what does an astronaut do in space if he or she gets diarrhea? An astronaut from NASA answered the question and said, funny you should ask, when I was on the space shuttle, I got diarrhea. You want to talk to the Prime Minister of Canada and ask a question? Trudeau is on Quora. You want a physics question answered? The best physicists in the world are answering questions for students. You want a tutorial to learn a lesson? Professors from Harvard are posting their classes, their lectures online. Everything we do is in that little box. And so if they can get it there for nothing, why would they come to us? And we don't realize yet, we keep doing things the way that we were taught and the way that we've always done it, and we don't realize that eventually students are just going to wake up to the fact, especially in the United States where education is so expensive. The average American student graduates with $30,000 of debt from a university. That's the average. I know Peace Corps volunteers who are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from their education. And they're asking themselves, what did I buy? How is it going to help me in the world? So that's the bad news. That's depressing. We don't have a future, right? There are no universities left. Unless we change with the world. So if our job is not to dump information into our students' heads, what is our job? Well, in the modern world, businesses, industries, the people who are going to hire our students want problem solvers. They want people who can look to the future, anticipate what people are going to need, what the problems are going to be, and solve problems. Solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet. So we have to be problem solvers too. So what is the problem that we have to solve? The problem for our students is not information. It's too much information. How do you sift through this sea of information and figure out what is valid and what is not valid? What can I use to solve the problem that I need to solve? How can I organize the information in a meaningful way? Our job, as Richard was saying yesterday, is to be the kind of coaches that can guide these people into how to use this information in an effective way. And to do that, we need to be teaching our students critical thinking. I know you've heard this phrase. It's a buzzword, a buzz phrase from Los Angeles to New York, from London to Helsinki, from Lviv to Kyiv. Every educational conference you go to, people will talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking, critical thinking. We've got to teach critical thinking. Here's the interesting thing about this. They did a survey of university professors in the United States. Public universities, private universities, the top universities, just all universities. What do you think about critical thinking? 89% of university professors say critical thinking is the primary purpose of what they do. It's the main job of what they do. Not teaching physics, not teaching grammar, not teaching mathematics, critical thinking. Well, let's see. Great, they got the message. Only 19% of those people can tell you what critical thinking is. They know it's important, they don't know what it is. And that is the real problem, is we know we're supposed to be teaching critical thinking, but we really don't know what that is or how to do it. And so that is our purpose today. We want to talk, first of all, about the fact that our universities are changing. And I don't think I need to convince you of this, because whether you believe this or not, it's going to change in front of your eyes. But that we need to change with it. And to do that, we need to be teaching our students how to be prepared for this world, and that's critical thinking. So we want to talk about what is critical thinking and how can we implement critical thinking in our classroom. We also have some examples of what critical thinking would look like in the classroom, but probably we may have to cut that a little bit short. And we're also going to want to get some feedback from you. Because in spite of the fact that the world is changing and there are so many things that are going on around us, we are still the experts here when it comes to education and how to teach. And so you are the primary resource for each of you in this room. So let's start with, I want to start with an analogy. Well, before we get to that, let me ask you, let me stop talking. I've been talking too much already. Those university professors in the United States, 19% of them don't know what critical thinking is. Maybe we can do them better. Can you tell me, what is critical thinking? How about Tanya? Tanya? Nice to meet you. Tanya, what is critical thinking? You know? A very important thing. Tanya is absolutely right. It's a very important thing. So is it Allah? Can you tell why Tanya believes it's a very important thing? What is this very important thing?
Okay, because it's in the process of study of the students, it's important.
It's important. We are all in agreement that it's important, right? What is it?
But if we analyze the information, to get the information and critically to accept it, not to get the whole that load of information, but to be able to differentiate and to know what is necessary for us and not what is not necessary.
Is it Ina?
No, Larissa.
Oh, Larissa? Larissa's right. This word analyze is important, right? Analyze means you're making a judgment about what is important and what is not important. This is like one of the most crucial skills of the modern world. I can't believe with so much information available to us, how often people perpetuate fake stories, right? When it's so easy to check them. So being able to analyze. What else is critical thinking? You look so young for a university professor. Tell me, what's your name?
Oh, I don't know, sir.
No, you know your name.
I'm Polina.
Polina. You go to school? You go to university? School? School? Yes? Okay. I won't put you on the spot. Are you Polina's mother? Yes? Can you tell us what is critical thinking? It's what? Analyzing? Coming to some conclusion, right? Yeah. What else? Is it Olena? Is it Olena? Yes? What is critical thinking? We have analyzing, trying to reach a conclusion. What? Yes, please.
When we have some
Welcome
problems,
over here.
the person has just to see the pros and cons of these problems, pluses and minuses, and see what profits can the person who looks at the problem take to herself or himself, and what can be good or bad for me. For example, if I study something, I have to see where can I implement these objects or which I'm studying or something.
You know, is this? Dolia?
Yeah, but you make
Okay. This is a really important thing that Dolia is saying here. It's like, it's taking and analyzing this problem. First of all, there's a problem. It's not some abstract thing. It's a real world problem that needs to be solved, right? And finding the solutions that work for that person. This is the other thing about the world that we're living in. It's not a world of mass production the way that it was in the 19th and early 20th century. If any of you have ever heard Sir Ken Robinson speak or seen any of his videos, he talks about the fact that our schools were modeled on factories, right? We take a product, a group of students, we batch them together by age group, we move them along the assembly line, chemistry class, bells ring like in a factory, move along the assembly line, grammar class, bells ring, time to eat, are you hungry? It doesn't matter, this is the time ding when you eat, right? This is how our schools were built, by factories. Our students live in a much more individualized world, as you were saying, right? What is the problem for them that they are trying to solve? The mass-produced factory system does not work for our students. And it shouldn't, because they're not going to go into that world. Some good answers here, and I think we're working towards it. If you go online and you type critical thinking, you will get lots of different definitions. For our purpose, we are going to go with this definition. Critical thinking is the ability to objectively analyze, as you said, data, facts, observable phenomenon, research findings, just all the stuff that's out there, in order to arrive at reasoned judgments, make informed decisions. In a democratic world, informed decisions are important, and solve meaningful problems, as Dolia said. Yes, sir.
I would be inclined to add the word and arrive at reasoned subjective judgments, because at the end, ultimately, if it is as that is, an objective analysis to come to a result, then a machine can do it.
And this is a good point that Richard is bringing up that sort of goes to the crisis in education. If there is a task that is a repetitive task that we're teaching our students to do, I guarantee you anything that is repetitive will be done by an algorithm and by a robot. Any job that can be repeated over and over again, human beings will not do in the future. And they don't even do in the present. So this is a really good point, right? We have to be teaching them to do things that an algorithm can't do, that a machine can't do. Thank you. That's an excellent point. Yes, please.
I would like to add this definition. And
Yes.
that being plunged into the huge areas of information, we won't be able to distinguish between trustworthy facts from fake, from false facts.
Maybe the most important thing today, right? With all this information out there, it is very difficult to figure out what is real and what is not real. We were talking last night that when, again, going back to when we were young, when I would watch the news in the United States, there were 3 news channels: ABC, NBC, CBS. All of it was sort of controlled by a small number of very professional, highly respected journalists that were all trained in the same system. Now, is it news? Is it not news? Where's it coming from? You know, yes, it's like, you know, we have a very friendly, large neighbor to the north that's more than happy to give us their view on what is the news in Ukraine, right? But how do we decide, is this real or not? That's an excellent point. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
According to your definition, as to my mind, you may have an ability to objective analysis if you have the basic knowledge. For 35 years ago, the student who finished 5 courses put his work to diploma room,
Sure.
and say, this method is the best. Teacher asked him, do you know some another method? No, but this is the best. What we can about critical thinking if students have no any basic knowledge.
And I'm glad you brought this. I'm sorry, what is your name? Yuri? George? Yuri? Yeah. Glenn. Nice to meet you. Okay. So, Yuri brings up a good point. Critical thinking does not replace the basic knowledge that students need to know. Before you can think critically, you have to have something to think critically about, right? So we can't just take people and say, okay, we're going to stop teaching them chemistry and physics and algebra and, you know, history and just critically analyze things, right? I'm a history teacher. Before we can talk about sort of the causes and the impact of the American-Vietnam War, we need to know about the basic facts of it, right? So students still need to get an education in information. It's never been easier to get that.
They don't need to go to university to do it.
And you're right, you don't need to go to a university to do that. You have a great library in this little tiny phone, right? But it's still important. They have to have this as part of their education. This idea of, there was something else. Somebody had said something that was triggering an idea in me. By the way, the classrooms of the present and the future should be like this. It's your students' education, right? They should be participating in it, challenging you. I love it. I was just telling Sean, I like it so much better than like after we do a presentation. People are always very kind and they're nice and they come, oh, that was great and that was wonderful and that's terrific. And I like that. I'm like anyone else. I like to hear praise. What I like even better is the person who comes up to me and says, you know, that was very interesting, but I think you're way wrong on this. I think you missed the point on that. I love that because that tells me the person is thinking about this critically. They're challenging me on it. I have to now defend myself. And if I'm right, then I will be able to give some kind of reasoned argument for why I'm right? So I want to give you an example of something to kind of point to what I'm talking about. Education, we kind of share some of the same goals, maybe some of the same methods, not as much as advertising. In a lot of ways, education and advertising are like siblings, right? Or maybe distant cousins. How would you, tell me, how do you think, maybe you've never thought of this, now I'm making the analogy, how is education like advertising? What do we have in common? What do you think? Yes. We have a target audience. Advertisers target what is their audience they're trying to reach? We have a target audience. Students, a certain kind of student, right? As they specialize, our target audience gets even smaller. What else does advertising and education have in common? We are both delivering information to this target audience, right? Yeah, and in many ways we are like the servants to our students, right? And advertisers will tell you they're sort of the servants to their industry, to their customers, right?
Influence.
We are trying to influence people, right? Aren't we trying to influence our students? We want them to be better people. We want them to be educated people. We want them to be informed, to be able to make good decisions in a democratic society. We want them to be successful and contribute to society. We are trying to make the world a better place. Oftentimes, in our cynical world, we skip over the fact that most of us went into education because we are idealists. We believe that we can make the world a better place by influencing the next generation to be better people, right? Advertisers want to influence too, but they're not so altruistic. They're not trying to make the world a better place. What are they trying to do? They want to sell something, right? And now, in this difference, let me ask you something. Who do you think does a better job at influencing people? Advertisers or educators?
Advertisers, because they use some techniques which are forbidden in education.
You know, I meant to ask people this last night and I forgot, and so I'm going to ask this blind without knowing the answer, because we grew up in different cultures. I know in the United States, there are certain advertisements, commercials, even little songs and jingles that I can think of and remember from when I was a child. Are there advertisements that you can think of right now that maybe you even saw 20 years ago that are still in your head? Yes? Can you recall one? Is there? My students often talk about the Coca-Cola polar bears. You know, that this one.
Coca-Cola is
Always Coca-Cola. They put that right in your head and it's still here. What a good job of teaching.
I even know the sound of this music.
You can hear it, and probably if you hear just a little bit of the music, it comes right back. Is there another, because I don't know what people were sort of influenced by in Ukraine or in the Soviet Union. I'm guessing advertising wasn't a priority, right? Almost no advertising.
Propaganda is the same thing.
Propaganda is the same thing, which is kind of, and I think in Spanish even, like propaganda is the word they use for advertising, right? So they're good at it, yes.
I think the difference between educators is that there is no one brand, but we educators have ever think about ourselves as a brand.
What an excellent observation. Because kind of our brand is what we're teaching, right? You know, but that's a big part of teaching, is to sort of reflect on what is it that I want my students to learn. I always begin every lesson, I begin every semester with, by the time this is over, what do I want them to remember? Because I know they're going to forget most of it, as we all do. I mean, think about even your own life. Pick a year from your childhood. If you added up all the memories of that year, I bet it wouldn't add up to a complete whole 24-hour day. We forget most of our life. Students forget most of what we teach them. So what do we want them to? But advertisers can have you remembering always Coca-Cola years later, right?
But you do remember a good teacher the same way you remember a good advert.
Yes. And why do you? Why do you remember a good
The way that
Connect with
they
emotions,
do it.
the teacher gives at the same time as advertising.
And see, that's the thing we don't think about very often. There's an emotional component to what we do, right? Oftentimes when students connect to us emotionally is when they want to work for us and when they want to really study, right? There is definitely an emotional component like advertising. I want to show you an advertisement for 1990 from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has always been very good at advertising, okay? So if you can bring up the first Coca-Cola advertisement, and not this one, but the first one, like, yes. And maybe go back to the beginning. Yeah, very good. You might recognize this man from 29 years ago. Let's see.
Joy from France.
From France, yeah. Does that mean he's an old man now? Are we old? Okay, thank you. Now, this is a good advertisement. I wanted to pick one of the better advertisements from 1990 because this is going to maybe represent the best of education in 1990. It was kind of interesting. It had some, we use the phrase eye candy. Joey from Friends is good looking, right? So it's interesting to look at, right? Kind of a neat little trick here where he's pulling the Coke off and drinking it. Kind of makes you thirsty for a Coke, you know? It's a very good, effective ad for 1990. But, like all ads from 1990, what is the relationship between the advertisement and the person who is watching it? What are we doing while this ad is going on? We're passive. We are sitting and we are watching. Right? We are receiving the information, sort of like how an education was when I was growing up, We sat there and we received the information from this educated person at the front of the class. That is my analogy for education as it was. Now I want to show you a new Coca-Cola advertisement. And this Coke ad was a whole campaign, the next Coca-Cola one. Okay, and oh, can you? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's a modern advertisement for Coca-Cola. What is the difference?
We involved. We are in action.
We are involved, right? How are we involved in this? In what way is the target audience involved in the advertisement?
You want to receive something, you have to do something, but it's fun, it's interesting, and you just eager to do it.
And that's
Yeah.
participate.
You hold your phone up and you want to share this with your friends, don't you?
Yeah.
Look at this. This is so cool. Watch. Oh, and it fills right up. Yeah? Oh, do you want to see something really cool? Look at this Coke machine. Watch. And right on the machine, it goes down, right? That's so cool. We are involved. We're involved in another way. By the way, that big billboard, that was kind of cool too, right? You go up there, you get a Coke from the billboard. This is interactive. And it's kind of interesting because not only is it interactive, but it's much more effective. This old 1990 ad, as good as it was, how does Coca-Cola know whether that ad worked? Maybe more people buy Coke, but how do you know it was that ad? Right? You have no way of knowing that the money you spent actually resulted in an increase in people buying Coke. But this ad, how do you measure how effective it was?
Connected to website, to
It's how many people downloaded? What?
yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. Also, when you got this Coke in your phone, what did you do with it? Coke Zero. They're trying to get people to try this new Coke, Coke Zero, right? You know how conservative people are on their soda. If you drink Coke, no, I don't want Pepsi. If you drink Pepsi, Coke is off, right? People don't want to try something new. So they're trying to get them to try this new Coke Zero. Once you had the Coke in your phone, you go to the store and they give you a free Coke Zero. They can measure how many Coke Zeros they gave out over a period of time. It's a very effective ad. It's interactive, it's interesting, it's fun. It's easy to measure the results of this. And so, as part of our analogy with advertising, Sean and I want to talk about that our education process needs to be interactive. It needs to be meaningful to our students. And it needs to be interesting. It needs to be kind of fun. So this first idea of it being interactive means that obviously we are not going to do a campaign like this in our classrooms. But interactive can mean getting your students to participate in the education process too. You said that you had your students post something on Instagram and then read responses. That's interactive. You play a game of Jeopardy with grammar, right? They are participating. That is interactive. You have them role play a situation. You are on a train and you're going to Kyiv and you're sitting next to a Canadian visitor and you have to strike up a conversation. Okay, you too. You're going to play this role. That's interactive. It doesn't have to be high tech. It just means that the students have to participate. One of the other key buzzwords that people hear all the time is student-centered learning. And they're probably like, student-centered, does that mean that we have to cater to the student? No. All it means is it's the difference between asking yourself, what did I teach versus what did they learn? That's the question we're asking. What did they learn? I can teach all day long, and if nobody learns anything, then I wasted my time, right? So being interactive helps them to learn. Sean, how about the meaningful one? You want to take over here? I'm trying to talk.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So, interactive, meaningful, interesting. This is our goal for your lessons from this point on. Huh? Well, maybe talk about meaningful, or as you wish. It's your, maybe show the gift.
Good. Okay, so to continue off of what Glenn's saying here, our lessons need to be meaningful because we're in a classroom, we're in front of our students, and if they don't want to be there, they're probably not going to learn a lot. It has to be personally meaningful for them. So before I give some examples, I'd like to see what teachers in this room have done to make their lessons meaningful for their students. So what is a meaningful lesson? Maybe you have an idea of what this is. Is it a feeling? Is it a memory? Can you notice your students are more involved? They're more creative? What is a meaningful lesson like?
Well, if they're awake at the end, it's always okay.
Absolutely. Good. And another question for you. Think back to when you were university students. How many lessons can you remember? Do you remember a teacher? Do you remember a specific lesson, an activity, something that was close to your heart? And you went home and it made you feel inspired, maybe to be a lifelong learner, to do more research, to follow up and expand your knowledge of the world or the subject. So show me with your hands, okay, who can remember their favorite lesson when they were a university student? Who can remember their favorite lesson when they were a university student?
These are
okay.
university teachers.
You can be honest.
3? Ooh.
Now, another question for you. So we have about 7 or 8 people who can remember their favorite university lesson, correct? Can you remember the content from that lesson? What did you learn? What was the objective? What was the assignment? Right? Maybe you remember the specifics, what the class was about, but I guarantee you remembered what that class felt like. Correct? And so this goes back to what Glenn was saying, that we are the best examples of what universities produce. We did the system correctly. We went through the system, we did everything correct, and a lot of university teachers, they expect their students to do the same thing. They're just a product of the university system. Well, if you think back to your favorite lesson, and you may not remember everything, every specific part of the lesson, but you remember how it felt, this is going to encourage your students to go home, and they're going to take this personally. They're going to apply it in their life, and we're going to set them on a course to be lifelong learners because it's meaningful, it's worth their time. Okay? Teaching doesn't stop when the class is over. And a lot of times it starts there. This is where we really capture our students' attention. We give them ideas. We give them new approaches, something that it kind of bothers them in a way, right? We don't want our students to be comfortable, to be happy, to be kind of coast and things are easy and we get our grades, we show up, we go home, we're not challenged. This is not what we're looking for here. We want to confront our students and give them something worthwhile to work on, to think about, to apply themselves, to socialize, to meet with other students, and really dig deep for something they didn't know they could do. Produce something new, right? Really try to discover a new side of yourself here. So, meaningful. You don't remember a lot of your classes, of course, right? Life is long, we have different parts of life. You don't remember the specific lessons, but you do remember the feelings. These are the things that we need to incorporate into our lessons. Okay, so we have an example of a meaningful advertisement, right? We're continuing this link between advertisement and education. I think you can compare them in a lot of different ways. I'd like to show you an advertisement of a meaningful advertisement. Okay, so Glenn can be our DJ here.
Okay.
So while Glenn is setting this up, I've got a question to ask you. Of course, we all watch commercials. We've seen commercials at some point in our life. Have you seen emotional, meaningful commercials? Something that elicits your emotion, right? Of course you have. Absolutely. We're exposed to so much material in our lives. Apps, TV shows, commercials, YouTube, Netflix. It's endless, right? It's endless. But how do we incorporate this into our lessons? Okay? I've got one small example here. We want to capture our students emotionally, and I hope this advertisement will capture you emotionally. Okay? There are some tissues on the table. You might need them at the end.
Okay.
You'll see why.
Okay. And this is the ad. I don't know how to bring it up on the screen.
Yeah, so it's the second advertisement. enjoyed this example of a meaningful advertisement. What was this advertisement about? What's the message here?
You're responsible for this problem, the social problem.
Social problem.
Track the attention of the audience to this problem.
What's the social problem being addressed here? Being, when adopting
People.
animals.
People be people.
So when people adopt animals, it said adopt responsibly, right? If you're going to adopt an animal, which is extremely popular in the United States, a lot of people, if they want a pet, a lot of people, they don't want to pay a lot of money for a purebred dog, right? A lot of times people are associated with kind of these dogs that they can, give a home to, give food to, make a better life for. They want to adopt a pet, but just like this advertisement, in the beginning, you had this girl. It's a metaphor, right? It's this girl, she's getting attention, she's new, she's exciting. You see the parents' reactions to this girl. They love celebrating her birthday, but this wears off over time. Responsibility sets in later, and the parents get impatient. They get upset when she makes mistakes, which are natural, right? Of course, we're going to make mistakes, we're human beings. But then they drive her out to the field, and only at the end, you discover that, oh, it's actually about dogs. It's about adopting pets. And you must be responsible when you adopt pets. So, this message is so relevant for education because our lessons need to be meaningful. I don't know about you, but I know this is true for me in my classes here in Ukraine. I teach 9 classes per week. I have my students, I know a lot of them well, but I don't know a lot about their lives. And for me, I taught middle school English for 2.5 years. I have my master's degree in English. I love working with teenagers. I think they're the most interesting creatures in the world. It's like their second stage of development in life. You have the first stage of development with 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And then you have these teenage years where they're really, again, they're kind of like toddlers, and they're discovering what life is about, who they are. Their bodies are changing, their emotions are changing. You know more about this, your parents, you've seen this firsthand. My point is, the emotional connection with students, this is the heart and soul of the meaningful education. And if our students come into our classes, and they sit in the back of the room, we don't know their names very well, we don't know important things about their lives, we don't know their ambitions, their motivations, their goals, we're going to lose this essential aspect of meaning in our lessons. So a few examples, and Glenn can share a really cool example here as well, of meaningful lessons in classes. Well, you may ask, okay, yes, lessons, of course you agree, they must be meaningful. But how have we made our lessons personally meaningful? Is there emotional response in our lessons? Who has an example of how you've made a lesson meaningful for your students? Because we remember this lesson from university. We remember how we felt. We don't remember the facts, but how have you made your lessons personally meaningful for your students? Maybe an example or two.
I've provoked mine. Some people are very reticent to speak. So by saying something particularly controversial that I know they don't agree with, it elicits a response. And for an English teacher, it's also good because the emotion comes in, so it's actually good for their intonation as well as getting a response. So deliberately being controversial can sometimes
Thorn in their side.
Yeah, exactly right.
Absolutely. And so if you can kind of create like a simulation, right, of an emotional response, you put your students in positions to have debates. Right? This is a wonderful example. I did this with actually Larissa, one of my co-teachers. We did this a few weeks ago, and it's a process. We had to teach our students how to have a real democratic debate. It's a real structure, it's a real process. It needs to be facilitated and pre-taught correctly, but the result's pretty cool because when you have students who know their roles, they know the structure of a debate, they know the time limits, they know what their job is, what type of material they need to prepare. They're working in their teams. You have the opposing team, you have the affirmative team. it unifies students, and they can choose the controversial issue. We had 10 controversial issues. Our students chose a controversial issue about whether or not social media is addictive. Like, what is a problem? Are people addicted to social media? Is it like a drug? We had 2 teams debate this. They prepared tons of material on this. And it's my contention that students wanted to do this because they chose the topic. They came, they were ready to really go at each other, to debate, to share ideas, and it was almost competitive. We had to facilitate this and moderate this. Maybe this is true for you as well. We're all teachers in this room. Do your students, do they have opportunities to really share information in a democratic way, a thoughtful way? Or sometimes do they kind of argue and no one's really heard, no one's listened to well? What's your experience with this? Can you facilitate a real conversation, a democratic conversation in your classrooms? Does this happen?
Yes.
Absolutely, this happens. This is very good. But it doesn't happen without preparation first. And we need to remember to make this meaningful, because that's where the real lesson comes out, right? Okay, Glenn has a wonderful example here of an assignment he's done with interviewing the oldest person in your family. I think this is another wonderful example of a meaningful lesson. So Glenn, if you'll share.
But I didn't have that one. That every time I see that little advertisement with the dog, that is like so sad. I tried to do this with my students, and then we're done, and it's like, okay, can we talk about this now? I do one of my favorite lessons with my students because, like Richard, I am not here to teach my students grammar, parts of speech. I always tell my Ukrainian colleagues and co-teachers, you know this so much better than I do. And your students know English grammar so much better than American students do. I am here to help them communicate, to actually reach another person with a message that they want to share. And one of my favorite lessons is I have my students interview the oldest person in their family about what was life like when they were the age of the student, 19 years old. And it is such a great lesson. It is so heartwarming, so emotional. I bring tissues because sometimes the students will start crying out of happiness. But they find out things about, usually it's a granny, sometimes it's a grandfather, but usually it's the grandmother. But they find out, they see their grandmother, or some cases great-grandmother, in a totally different light. You know, because they've always seen this person in front of them at this age. It's hard for them to imagine that this person could have been 19. And I've had students, it's like, Mr. Glenn, you would not believe my granny had so many boyfriends. And it's like, yeah, she was 19. She liked to dance. She liked to listen to music. And often it's, I tell them, I wish you could bring your grannies in with you to the class, because it also creates some sort of bond where I ask them, it's like, were your grannies, was your grandfather, were they okay with this? It's like, oh, they were saying, call me next week. I've got more stories to tell you. You know, they want to share. And I always tell the students, it's like, okay, maybe sometimes it may seem like they talk too much, you know, but you listen now, because by the time you really want to know, they might not be there for you to ask. So it's meaningful to them because there's an emotional family connection with them. They're speaking English. It doesn't matter what they're speaking English about. They forget about, am I saying this correctly? Am I using the right grammar? They get caught up in the story. And so I think Dolina is right. There has to be, Dolia, I'm sorry, Dolia. There has to be like an emotional connection. It can be meaningful in the sense that they're thinking, is this going to help me in the world of work? You know, preparing students for job interviews or something along these lines. I mean, it's just, they've got to be able to say, this lesson means something to me. So we've got interaction, we've got meaningful. The other thing is that the lesson has to be interesting. And for some of us who are older teachers, this is kind of a little controversial thing, because even in the United States, when I talk to teachers about this, often the response is, I am not an entertainer. Education is difficult. You have to put in the work. We're not here to sing and dance and, you know, this sort of thing. I get that idea. But here's the difference between advertisers and education. Advertisers don't make those statements or ask those questions. They meet their target audience where they are. They don't try to make them some idealistic version of what they want them to be. And the fact is, we live in a world where entertainment is paramount to our students. Now, maybe 200 years ago, the primary source of entertainment was going to listen to some politician give a speech, right? But today, entertainment is everywhere, and students expect to be entertained. Now, I would teach in Orlando, Florida. We have Disney World, we have Universal Studios, we have sunshine, we have the beaches. I know I'm not going to compete with that. I'm never going to be more interesting than a roller coaster or American Hills ride, right? But I can engage them. And I have always believed that teachers in university, when they're being trained, should be taking classes in theater. We put on a little show for 90 minutes. We have an audience. We have to keep that audience with us, right? We need to learn the techniques of entertaining students. We don't have to do a little song and dance, but we do have to mix things up and keep them entertained. So, advertisers also realize that in the modern world, just showing a product and saying buy it with a little song is not enough to get somebody to watch advertising, because people don't watch advertising on television anymore. They watch it on YouTube, which means that they are voluntarily clicking to watch the ad. And if they don't like it, they click to something else, right? So these advertisers realize to get their audience, they have to entertain them with a YouTube video. So this last advertisement I want to show you is, well, I'll let you see what it's an advertisement for, and we'll talk about this. So this last one is, I don't know what it's called. Is it
Drama button.
Drama?
Drama button on a quiet square.
Yeah, it's the on a quiet square. Okay.
Щось робить.
Surreal. Еще нельзя убрать за собой. О, это самое интересное.
And if you could pause it here. Here, yeah. Your daily dose of drama. TNT is Turner Classic Television. It's a television cable station. They want you to sign up for this cable station. They show movies, right? Now, here's the interesting thing about this. You say, wow, that's a lot of money to put into advertising to just maybe 100 people in this little square. But of course, that's not who they were advertising to, right? Who are they advertising to? To us. And in fact, I think, how many views does this have? Can you tell? For this advertise on YouTube?
Probably millions.
I think it's,
How many hundred million?
I think it's 5 million. Is it? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I think it is. It's like 5 or 6 million people have viewed this. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong. 56 million people have viewed this, right? And not only did they view it passively, the way old advertisements were, they went there and they watched it. And after they watched it, they sent it to their friends and said, this is so cool, you've got to watch this, right? And so now you've got people, your target audience, not only interested, actively leaning forward for their lesson, their advertisement, they're sharing it with other people as well. And why? You know why. What was your response to the advertisement? I heard your response. What? Laugh. It was funny. You're surprised. What's going on? I wish that happened, you know. I live in Lviv. It's like, wow, I'd love to see that in the middle of the square, you know, just all of a sudden, this craziness.
And the same happens in education. If you have a good teacher and we like the lesson, yeah, we share it with our friends, with our, for example, if I'm a student, here I say, oh, this teacher is cool, there, and her lessons, or these lessons are very cool. Yeah. And they want to come to your class, and they want to visit your class, because they want to receive also these emotions.
What a great observation. It's one of the things that's a little bit different in the United States with universities is we get to pick our classes. We get to pick our teachers. And so when I would sign up for my lessons at the beginning of the semester, one of the things I would do is I would go through and talk to people and say, who are the really good professors you had? Who's engaging? Who's interesting, right? I would rather have a good teacher teaching a subject that maybe I'm not that interested in than have a poor teacher teaching a subject that I love. A good teacher will excite me, interest me, share with me why she is so passionate about this, and help make me passionate about it too. And that's where, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is where the making it interesting comes in. We don't have to put on a big production like this. But we do have to recognize that people cannot pay attention for very long periods of time. And often we have our students for 90 minutes. So we have to mix things up. We can't stand there for 90 minutes and talk to them. We have to show them a YouTube video. We have to get them out of their seats and interacting. One of the most interesting lessons that I have seen since I have been here is this lesson that you did on what was the teaching Arabic. Are you all familiar with this lesson? Could you just tell them real briefly, what did you do? Because I had a chance to see this and it was amazing.
Really crazy, right? But we were taught French, and then we did a center course with Sean, and it was an approach to show how you can start teaching without the support of your first language. And it was really a great approach because it was a life-changing experience. How not to translate from your first language into a foreign language.
Yeah, they did this at our camp. And we're sitting there, and they got up, and they didn't say a word in English or Ukrainian. They just started saying these, you know, Arabic phrases. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, and now we're waiting for the directions, right? They pick 6 people to come up. What are they going to do? We don't know. We're all leaning forward. This is what we want from our students, for them to lean forward, to be in the class. They went through the whole lesson, never spoke a word of Ukrainian, never spoke a word of English. The entire room learned how to go to a cafe and order coffee or tea or ice cream and cake in Arabic, you know, how to take the order as a waiter. And we're all just like, how are they doing this? And it was amazing. And it was like, what, 15, 20 minutes long? It was so interesting. And again, sometimes we think that technology will entertain the students for us. Technology is a tool, right? That's all it is. It's a tool. We are the craftsmen that use this tool in an effective way to engage them. So we want our lessons to be interactive. We want them to be meaningful. We want them to be interesting. And so I think we need like maybe a little bit of a break for bathroom coffee.
In 30 minutes.
30 minutes left of the whole thing?
In 30 minutes we will be given a chance to receive the certificates have a little break, and we'll start in 12:15.
Another
Another session.
Okay, then we'll hold off on this. But then I was going to tell you, what I want you to do is, should we have them fill out right now the card? Okay, I want you to think of 3 lessons that you have. One that you think is interactive, that you do, one that is meaningful, and one that is interesting. And Sean is going to, and maybe someone can help here, to hand out 3 different colored cards, or maybe, can you help us out here? And on the orange card, I would like you to write, you don't have to write a whole description, maybe like an extended title. Like yours might be Teaching Arabic Without Knowing Arabic. Just the lesson, okay? Write meaningful and tell us, I'm sorry, not meaningful, interactive, orange is interactive, and tell us the name of an interactive lesson that you have. And then on the green card, write meaningful and tell us about a meaningful lesson that you've taught. And then on the pink card, interesting, an interesting lesson that you've taught. So the orange is interactive, just the title or just a very brief description. Orange is interactive. Green is meaningful. It can be emotional, it can be meaningful to your students. And pink is interesting. So take about 5 minutes and write down. Orange is interactive, green is meaningful, pink is interesting. I don't know if Sean had asked you. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, sure.
Название урока, допустим, вмир количества. Как изучать арабскому, не знаю. То есть описать один из ваших уроков. Имеется
Again, it's 1%. And then the first part like a reflection. Yeah, exactly. Reflection. This is a chance for you to think about your teaching skills. Share with us.
Договор с ним. меня лагерь, который мой поддерживает. А здесь мне дали просто каждый раз. Я скорее отвечаю на я просто на всякий случай дали
So just give one example.
Следим за вашим передвижением.
Да? Я веду проект, скажем, я пока я в кровати еще где-то страниц 10 пытаюсь поставить новую информацию, потому что подписываюсь на разные ссылки, в смысле я их раскидываю по вот этим страничкам и стараюсь тоже вот эту нашу страницу, Украинской ассоциации. А свои личные обычно только какие-то такие ссылки.
Я больше ничего. Я все время смотрю, я скидки классные разные. Это вы ваших
У меня коллеги запрещали. У меня более 3000, я сейчас вот их перевозила, то мне было так, сколько вот это выставочные шкафы.
живые?
Нет, конечно. Фигурины. Это шкафы, я туда вообще не могу засунуть, эти выставочные шкафы. Мне одна девочка иногда у нее все вынимала, я все это каждую захватывала отдельные коробочки складывала, отдельная коробочка, отдельные ящики, отдельные ящики, отдельные. Еще что-то, и все сама только переводила, потому что они очень дорогие, это моя инвестор, там где-то 1060 уже $1000 этих штук. Но это мое, я говорила, не собирать бриллианты, они говорят, будет дороже. А теперь Тимофей, мой сын, там какой-то он тоже мне все вставлял, стеклянные, зеркальные. И библиотека, вот это вот все, значит, они очень интересные. Конечно, почему? Потому что они такие трансформирующие. Ласточка, брюшечку.
Именно акцент.
Короче, тоже зацепиться за какой-то свой формат. Текстом изучать, стала заниматься, да, появляться в Ну и потом, да, вот ювелирный дизайнер самолетов, девочка наша. Я покажу.
Did you put your name on them? Yeah, go ahead and put your name on them so when I kind of go through these and maybe ask you to tell us a little bit about it, I know who to do it. So just put your name down at the bottom. Do I start this or do you? That's what I mean. So you're stuck this. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so as they're done, I'll get the cards. Yep. Okay. Thank you. That's okay. That's okay. We just want to hear examples back from you before the end. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll come around and get the cards. Sean is going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the meaningful part of this, solving real-world problems, and then we'll take a break and finish up here. So if you have the cards done, make sure your name's at the bottom, and I'll take those for you. Yeah, just put your name at the bottom, because I will ask you later on maybe to tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so Glenn is going to walk around, collect the cards. I'll continue because I have an example I'd love to share with you, and we have about 20 minutes before our coffee break. Okay, so attention up here, please. Uvaha. Okay, so let's get back to this theme of critical thinking, right? We talked about these three components: interactive, meaningful, interesting. We must combine all of these elements into our lessons. And these lessons, they should be oriented around real-world problems. It shouldn't be all theory all the time. We want our students to really work on something that exists in their world. Maybe you've heard of project-based learning.
Yeah.
Have you heard this term before?
Project?
Project-based learning.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah? What's an example of project-based learning that you might know?
When we give young students tasks, there are some reports, and then we choose the
Help themselves.
and that they
Or give them a problem to ask them to suggest.
Good. Very good.
Doesn't have to be
Or problem-based learning. Absolutely. Wonderful definition. So, for those of you who couldn't hear, I know that the room is big, we have a lot of people. So you've heard of these terms, project-based learning, problem-based learning. This is kind of the approach. This is the process that we should be introducing to our students. We should be giving them a real-world problem, something that exists in their community, and they should be responsible for finding a way to figure out how to solve it through presentations, through skills. We all teach English, well, not all of us. I know most of us here teach English for specific purposes, correct? Business English, tourism. If we give our students, and trust me, students want more responsibility. They won't say it, they won't act like it sometimes, but internally they want it. Because like every human being, they want opportunities to grow. They want to become better personally. It may not always look like it, but it's always true. So if you give your students more responsibility, you give them a real-world problem in Ukraine, in Lviv, in Ternopil, and you have them work together to try to solve it, this is a perfect opportunity for them to practice these skills. What better motivation, right? What better motivation than a real problem? I have an example of this I'd like to share with you. So during World War II, there was a Hungarian mathematician named Abram Wald. Maybe some of you have heard of him. Anyone? Or is he new to everyone here? Okay, the story will be more interesting, so that's cool. So this man, during World War II, he was a famous mathematician. He was approached by the United States Army, the United States military, to do some research. Okay? He was approached by the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was asked to provide some investigations, some statistics, some analysis of airplanes, B-52 bombing planes for the U.S. Army in World War II. Of course, these bombing planes are shot. They're damaged during war, right? And the United States military, they hired Abram Wald to do a statistical analysis of the damage that these B-52 bombers occurred or collected during war. So they wanted to know, the question was, how should we reinforce these aircrafts to make them stronger, to make them more prepared for war, so they can withstand damage, so they can take more bullets and they can still fly, they can still be effective. Of course, there's a lot of money behind this, there's a lot of research. It's the United States military. As with every country's military, this is like the cutting edge of technology, engineers, research. This is like the most important thing. So, they hired this engineer. You can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. And the main question here, they had this man, Abram Wald, run a statistical analysis of where the damage was done to these B-52 bomber planes. You can see with these red dots here, these are bullet holes, right? Damage to the airplanes. And the question was, how do we reinforce? How do we put more metal or better build the aircraft? What part should we reinforce to make the aircraft better? Here's a graph. We have the section of the plane, the engine, the fuselage, that's this part here. We have the fuel system and the rest of the plane, the wings, the tail, and we have bullet holes per square foot, average, an average number, okay? Now, look at these numbers here. We have the section of the plane, the average amount of bullet holes per square foot. If you're going to reinforce an aircraft, if you're going to pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into reinforcing these planes and make them equipped for war, look at these numbers. What part of the plane should you equip? maybe the question wasn't completely clear. Where's the most damage happening to the aircraft? Where's the biggest problem? Well, look at the numbers. We have the fuselage 1.73, rest of the plane 1.78. So we have these numbers here. What part of the plane needs more armor? Needs more protection? Okay, we have fuselage, rest of the plane. We have the statistics here. Well, okay, maybe perhaps engine. That's pretty important, right? Now, we have the information here. Okay, we have the average of the bullet holes per square inch, or per square foot, I'm sorry. And this question, if we think about it with this approach, with the numbers and how do we get these planes more equipped for war? Well, there's something that really important that we're not considering here. Okay? Because all the planes that
wait. Before you say this. Sure. Abraham Wald came back to the Army and he said to them, yes, I've looked at all of your data. This is where the damage is. This is where the damage is. You can only put so much metal on a plane. You can't reinforce the whole thing. It's too heavy. He said you should reinforce the engine. The Army Corps of Engineers was like, what? No bullets. What was his thinking? How does he arrive at this conclusion when obviously the bullet holes are everywhere but the engine?
Because the faster you fly and the more power you have, the less likely you are to be hit by bullets.
It's like running through the rain. You die there. This wasn't it. He did a critical analysis of this, and he came to the exact opposite conclusion of the Army. Why is he saying they need to reinforce the engine when there's no bullet holes in the engines?
Because there are no bullet holes.
Engine doesn't work, the plane will fly.
This is true, so keep going with that.
It doesn't matter the number of the holes, but it matters maybe to save the pilot and to get the
What
pilot
planes is the Army analyzing?
bombing.
Germany?
What planes are they doing the analysis on?
Shot down.
The ones that come back to the airport. What planes are missing?
Shot.
Yeah, I don't want to be shot down.
Where do you think those got shot?
The damage.
I'm sorry to interrupt that. I wanted them to figure it out. Yeah.
Thank you. So, the example here, Glenn, thank you very much. The statistical analysis was done on planes that returned from war. They returned with damage, but they survived, right? There was damage to the wings, to the fuselage, but these pilots survived. These planes were intact. The research for planes that were destroyed, that had damage to the engine, these were the planes that needed to be analyzed in order to know where do these planes need to be reinforced. So this is why it's a great example of critical thinking, because you have a mathematician, a Hungarian mathematician, who came to a complete opposite conclusion than all of the US Army engineers. And there's a lot of money behind this, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm sure. Okay? And we have two very different conclusions, but it's a perfect example of how do we think about problems critically, and how do we solve real-world problems, even in the case of saving lives, right? In the case of saving lives. This is a perfect example of critical thinking. You can read more about this. It's a really interesting story. I just learned about this as well. But this is not the correct solution, because this is just for planes that return. The planes that didn't return, these are the planes that they need to conduct research on. So the engine is the best place to reinforce. The planes that were destroyed, they were shot in the engine. This mathematician said, reinforce the engine. This is where we spend the money. This is how we save lives. The United States Army said, fuel system, fuselage, rest of the plane, higher numbers. Let's look at it this way. But they didn't think. The planes we need to think about were the planes that didn't come back. Those are the people who died. That's what we need to reinforce. So it's a different approach, right? It's a different state of mind, and this is what we need to include when we think about our lessons with our students. It's how do we get our students to think from different angles? How do we get our students to think about real-world problems with project-based learning or problem-based learning? I think there are tons of opportunities with using English or using business or whatever your specialization is to get your students to go out and interact in the community, to have projects like this with real motivation that are interesting, meaningful, and engaging. There are so many examples of this, and I think it's time that our students, they need to be involved. We really need to get them to do these things. It's not just theory, lecture, they go home, we go through the motions, but it's like, how can we create a project to have students maybe clean up graffiti in Lviv, or teach other people in English, or interact with government, how to conduct classes where people don't graffiti as much. There's motivation there to clean up a community, and there's a wonderful opportunity for training or something like that. But this is why it's meaningful, and this is why it's essential for critical thinking.
And there's and of course, as we talked about this definition is like, the ability to analyze data, which he does analyze this data, right? To arrive at a meaningful solution. Saving lives is pretty meaningful, right? Our students today have never had a greater opportunity to impact the world individually from their homes, from their laptops. It's pretty amazing. There's another real world problem. This is a real world problem in Ukraine, is that prosthetics for people who have lost limbs are very expensive. They can cost tens of thousands of dollars. For children in particular, this is a problem because not only is it expensive, but children grow. Not only do they outgrow their clothing, but we don't think about this, they would outgrow their prosthetic limbs as well. And how many parents can really afford tens of thousands of dollars? And so here's a real world problem that university students played an important role in solving this problem. I think in particular, there was a university student in South America who was the one who first came up with this. These kids need limbs, right? It's very expensive to create these lifelike human, automated, mechanical limbs. And so he said, let's throw out the making them look realistic. They're kids. Let's make them look like superhero hands. Let's make them look like Spider-Man, like Iron Man. We can make this out of plastic. And you don't need a whole factory to do this. We have 3D printers. You can do a 3D printer and print out the mechanism for a specific child and their specific need in multiple colors to look like their favorite superhero. And it doesn't have to have little engine parts in it. It can work with the body itself so they can do basic things. Grasp, pick up things, point, right? Participate in their everyday lives. And so he did a 3D printout of a little superhero hand. The demand was phenomenal. There is now a company that handles this. We don't have enough 3D printers to do this. No problem. The world does, and we are all linked together. So they linked together, people volunteered to have their 3D printers used to print out these mechanical limbs for children. In the next 2 years, over 5,000 3D printers around the world are going to print out more than 6,000 of these mechanical limbs for children. And excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The testimonials from the children are amazing because they've gone from being these objects to be shunned, you're kind of strange, you have no hand, to now the other kids are like, how do I get one of those, right? That is so cool. You look like Iron Man, and the kids want to talk about it and ask about it, and it makes them now more normal. This is a real, a real world problem that was solved mostly by university students and is done by amateurs around the world that people around the world are participating in, that you don't need a factory for. You don't need a government agency to give you a grant. You don't need permission from someone up here. We can do it. They can do it. This is what we talk about, having something meaningful, doing something real that's going to impact others. You look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's a question really. I think in some ways you're preaching to the converted. I think a lot of people here, a lot of these educators would agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying.
Yeah.
The problem is the reality of an education system in Ukraine and other countries is it isn't run by educators. run by politicians, okay? And it's run by people who don't appreciate this to a certain extent. We are living in a system where there are targets, where you have to, with, again, everything you live or die by your exam results and your failure rates and everything like that. And that doesn't really square the circle for me, because when you're talking about creativity and self-expression and critical thinking, which I wholeheartedly agree with you on everything that you say, the reality on the ground is it's not us that need this lecture. It's the people that make the decisions, the politicians, the ministries, not just here, everywhere. Those are the people, and there are lots of other vested interests. Look at the English language testing thing. Massive industry. Sure. It's not in anybody's, their interest to change it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we square that circle?
And that is the question. In the United States, in our school system, our schools are funded based on the number of students that you have. So several times a year, teachers have to do, and this is a horrible expression, but this is how we commonly refer to it, we have to do a warm body count. This is what we call it, a warm body count. We have to count how many warm bodies we have in our classroom, which when you think about that, it's like, okay, is there any possibility that there are some non-living cold bodies in it? But anyway, let it be. And it's not about who's getting educated, what are we doing? It's just you're paid for the number, and you're right. And there are vested interests in this. There is a lot of money in education.
Betsy DeVos's family.
Yes, and I don't really have the answer to that. I know, it's funny, Sean and I talked about this. We met with the Assistant Minister for Higher Education in Kyiv, and we were talking about this presentation. We need to take this to the Ministry of Education. We need to talk to them about this is the world is changing, and if you don't change with it, I've had this discussion also with like people in my university who are in positions of authority, and I've tried to make this argument. It's like your children are going to leave Ukraine. If you don't give them a meaningful education that will allow them to compete in the world around them, they're going to leave this country that I know they love. So it's not just a matter of the survival of universities. It's about the survival of this country. It's, the people who we are educating have to have a reason to stay here, to build industry here, to build, a future here. And I wish I had the answer to how to reach those people. Maybe I need to start a television show where I'm a comedian who becomes a president after being a Peace Corps volunteer, and then run for president in Ukraine and see if I can get elected that way.
Yeah, something like that might be more open to new ideas.
I would hope so.
Existing.
I think, and I'm in the older bracket, I think our universities need to start giving leadership positions to younger people.
That's true.
It's got to be, because I've had this discussion with older teachers about how in the United States our students pick their own classes, and in Ukraine they do not. It's a curriculum is delivered to them, and they always ask me, well, Glenn, what do you do if they pick the wrong classes, if they make the wrong choices? And I say, oh, it's not a matter of if, they absolutely will. They will take stupid classes. They will take things that they don't need. One, this is how you learn to make decisions. You make mistakes. But number two, I am not equipped to tell a 19-year-old what it is they need to know for their future. I was trained for a very different future. I don't know what it's going to be like for them in 5 or 10 years. None of us do. The jobs they will be doing don't even exist yet. Yet we're going to presume to tell them, here's an entire curriculum that you need for 4 years to prepare you for a world that doesn't exist yet. That's arrogance. That is real arrogance to say that we know better. We've got to turn over control to our students. We have got to put younger people in charge who understand this world much better than those of us who are really, illegal aliens in this new world. We're not natives to this world the way they are. That's a long non-answer to your question. I don't know. I really don't know.
We're going to the break.
Good time to go to the break. Maybe we can talk about this in the
Please,
break.
всі оставайтесь на місцях, будемо зараз вручати дипломи, сертифікати. Glenn,
Yes.
Elena will tell you about the schedule of